Welcome back to Raul Effect, where we explore the hidden psychology behind relationships, attachment, and emotional connection to help you see what most people miss. What if the strongest emotional connection you've ever felt wasn't actually a sign of lasting love? What if the intensity that keeps pulling you back is the very thing preventing real stability? Today, we'll uncover why avoidant relationships feel so powerful, yet so confusing, and how to tell the difference between chemistry and genuine emotional security. Most people misunderstand avoidant attachment because they only judge what they can see. They notice someone who seems calm, independent, emotionally reserved, and difficult to read, then assume there is very little happening beneath the surface. But that assumption is often wrong. Avoidant people are not usually lacking emotion. In many cases, they experience emotions very intensely. The difference is that early in life, they learned that expressing those emotions did not feel safe. Maybe their feelings were dismissed. Maybe vulnerability was met with rejection. Maybe emotional closeness felt unreliable or unpredictable. Whatever the reason, they adapted by keeping their emotions contained rather than expressing them openly. Over time, this emotional restraint becomes part of who they are. They value self-control, independence, and appearing unaffected by difficult situations. But emotions that remain buried do not disappear. They stay inside, building quietly beneath the surface until they eventually need somewhere to go. For many avoidant individuals, physical intimacy becomes one of the few places where those emotions can finally be released. The reason is psychological. Emotional intimacy often feels uncertain because it requires openness, trust, and sustained vulnerability. Physical closeness, however, follows a structure. It has clear boundaries, a beginning and an end, making it feel easier to manage. To an avoidant nervous system, that structure creates a sense of safety. Within those moments, feelings they normally keep hidden can suddenly emerge. Passion, affection, desire, tenderness, longing, and even deep emotional connection may appear with surprising intensity. To their partner, those experiences can feel incredibly powerful because they are genuine. They are witnessing emotions that have been held back for a long time, finally finding expression. But this is where confusion often begins. Intensity should never be mistaken for emotional availability. An avoidant person can share incredibly passionate moments while still struggling to remain emotionally open once those moments end. Their feelings are real, but they exist inside an environment where vulnerability feels temporary and controlled. As soon as that moment passes, their usual emotional defenses often return without conscious effort. They become quieter, more distant, harder to understand again. That sudden contrast leaves many partners confused. One moment, the avoidant seems completely connected, fully present, and emotionally engaged. The next, they seem emotionally unavailable. Many people assume those intimate moments prove lasting emotional openness. They expect that same closeness to continue naturally in everyday life. For the avoidant, however, those experiences often exist in separate emotional compartments. This is not necessarily manipulation. It is compartmentalization. Without realizing it, they have learned to separate what they feel from what they reveal. Physical intimacy becomes the one place where emotions can flow without threatening their sense of independence. Outside that protected space, vulnerability begins to feel risky again, so their emotional walls quietly return. That is why physical closeness often carries a deeper meaning for avoidance. It is not simply about attraction. It becomes one of the few situations where they can experience connection without feeling emotionally overwhelmed. For many people, vulnerability begins with conversations, sharing fears, insecurities, needs, and hopes. For avoidants, those conversations often trigger discomfort because they associate emotional dependence with losing control or sacrificing their independence. They may avoid emotionally intense discussions. They may redirect attention away from their inner world. They may withdraw whenever emotional expectations begin to grow. Physical intimacy works differently. It allows closeness without requiring constant emotional explanation. They can feel deeply connected without having to describe every feeling they experience. Because those moments have clear limits, they often feel much safer. Control plays an important role here. When avoidants feel they can manage how intimacy starts, develops, and ends, they often relax more completely. Sometimes they appear incredibly attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present, more so than people who openly express emotions every day. Naturally, their partner sees this as proof of emotional openness. But being fully present in a moment does not automatically mean someone is capable of maintaining long-term emotional availability. That is the difference many people overlook. The avoidant may honestly feel close during those experiences, yet maintaining that same level of openness afterward can feel overwhelming. Once the emotional intensity settles, their nervous system shifts back into self-protection. They retreat, often without fully understanding why. For the other person, this creates emotional confusion. One day there is remarkable closeness. The next day there is emotional distance. Wanting reassurance is completely understandable, yet the more pressure the avoidant feels to maintain that same emotional intensity, the stronger their instinct becomes to step back again. The cycle continues because the real issue was never an absence of love or feeling. It was the fear of remaining emotionally exposed for too long. This creates a surprising contradiction. The place where an avoidant appears most emotionally open is often the place where they secretly feel safest. The vulnerability is genuine, but it exists inside carefully controlled conditions. It is closeness with invisible boundaries. Connection with an emotional exit always available if things become too overwhelming. When you understand this, you stop assuming physical intensity automatically reflects emotional readiness for a lasting relationship. You begin recognizing the difference between someone who can experience deep connection in certain moments and someone who can consistently remain emotionally available over time. From there, another important pattern becomes easier to recognize. Avoidant relationships rarely move in a straight line. Instead, they often follow repeating cycles. To someone unfamiliar with avoidant attachment, those shifts can feel random or confusing, but underneath them is a predictable emotional process. When distance returns, the avoidant begins feeling emotionally regulated again. Their independence feels restored. The pressure eases. The expectations become quieter. And once that internal tension fades, something interesting often happens. Their curiosity slowly returns. Their attraction becomes stronger again. The desire for connection begins to grow. Sometimes, even before they realize it themselves, they start missing the very closeness they once needed to escape. For many people with avoidant attachment, desire often grows after they have had enough space. Emotional distance gives their nervous system time to settle, allowing them to feel safe enough to want connection again. After some time apart, they may be the one who reaches out first. They become more attentive, more engaged, and sometimes unexpectedly affectionate. Quite often, that renewed energy is expressed most strongly through physical closeness. To the other person, the chemistry can feel even stronger than before. The attraction seems undeniable, almost impossible to ignore. But much of that intensity is created by the separation itself. The distance builds emotional tension, and reconnecting releases it all at once. Yet as the avoidant moves closer again, another process quietly begins. One part of them genuinely wants intimacy. Another part immediately starts looking for signs of danger. For an avoidant, danger is not always betrayal or rejection. More often, it is the fear of becoming too dependent, losing independence, feeling emotionally overwhelmed, or believing the relationship will slowly consume their identity. So while one side of them is drawn toward closeness, the other is preparing to create distance. Eventually, they begin stepping back again. Sometimes it happens gradually. Their replies become shorter, their emotional energy changes, and they seem less present. Other times it feels sudden, almost as if a switch has been flipped. Either way, distance returns because distance restores their internal sense of safety. From that point, both people begin living in completely different emotional realities. For the avoidant, space creates relief. Their nervous system settles, the emotional pressure fades, and before long, their desire for connection slowly returns. For their partner, however, The silence creates confusion. They replay conversations. They question what changed. They search for answers that never seem to come. Because the earlier connection felt so intense, the absence now feels even more painful. The memory of closeness becomes stronger precisely because it is missing. Then, when the avoidant returns, the emotional release feels powerful again. There is relief, hope, excitement. It feels as though everything has fallen back into place. And once again, physical intimacy often becomes the quickest way to bridge the emotional gap without ever discussing the distance that created it. This is one reason these relationships can become emotionally addictive. People often believe they are attached only to the individual, when in reality they may also be attached to the emotional cycle itself. The constant movement between distance and intensity creates emotional highs and lows that the brain can mistake for extraordinary chemistry. But intensity should never be confused with stability. Healthy relationships are built through consistency, emotional reliability, and a sense of safety that remains even when life is quiet. Avoidant relationships often move differently. Instead of gradually deepening, they rise and fall in waves. Connection grows stronger, distance returns, then the cycle begins again. Unless both people recognize what is happening, the relationship slowly becomes trapped in repetition. One person keeps searching for reassurance. The other keeps searching for breathing room. Another mistake people often make is mislabeling what they are experiencing. They call it incredible chemistry when much of it comes from emotional contrast. They call it emotional depth when the intensity has actually been magnified by uncertainty and absence. The body responds strongly to those emotional swings, even when they do not represent lasting security. Real intimacy is not measured only by how amazing the reunion feels. It is measured by what remains steady between those reunions. If closeness only exists after separation, and passion only grows after distance, then what you may be experiencing is not lasting stability. It may simply be the same emotional cycle repeating itself. Looking even deeper, another misunderstood pattern becomes clear. Many people interpret the avoidant's confidence, calmness, or emotional control during intimate moments as strength or dominance. Often, it is something else entirely. It is self-protection. At the heart of avoidant attachment is a deep fear of becoming emotionally consumed. Not simply being hurt, but losing independence, emotional balance, or the identity they worked so hard to protect. For them, intimacy can unconsciously feel risky because it carries the possibility of emotional engulfment. That fear does not disappear during physical closeness. Instead, it changes form. Without realizing it, they often try to maintain control over the experience itself, not necessarily to manipulate anyone, but to regulate their own emotions. They influence the pace. They control the rhythm. They decide when intimacy increases and when emotional distance quietly returns. Doing this allows them to stay connected while preventing themselves from feeling overwhelmed. As long as they control the boundaries, closeness feels manageable. To their partner, this can feel incredibly attractive. Their energy seems focused, confident, intentional. Yet beneath that certainty, there is often a quiet feeling that something emotionally deeper is still being held back. That is where confusion begins. Part of the partner feels deeply connected. Another part senses an emotional imbalance they cannot quite explain. Physical closeness feels mutual. Emotional openness often does not. As the relationship continues, the partner naturally wants more consistency. They try to recreate the connection they experienced, believing it will eventually become permanent. But the avoidant experiences that growing closeness differently. As the relationship moves beyond the emotional conditions where they feel safe, internal pressure begins rising again. Their protective system activates. Sometimes they become more controlling of the emotional pace. Other times, they quietly withdraw. What once felt spontaneous now reveals its hidden structure. The passion was genuine, but it was always filtered through an unconscious need to maintain emotional safety. Understanding this changes everything. True intimacy is not defined only by emotional peaks. It is revealed through consistency when nothing dramatic is happening. It is the ability to remain emotionally present without constantly managing the distance. When control becomes necessary to maintain closeness, the relationship slowly shifts from shared vulnerability into emotional regulation. That is where many partners become confused. They experienced undeniable chemistry. The attraction felt authentic. The emotional intensity seemed too powerful to ignore. Naturally, they begin believing those moments must represent long-term love or lasting emotional growth. After all, most people associate intensity with depth. In secure relationships, emotional and physical closeness naturally strengthen each other over time. With avoidant attachment, those two experiences are often separated. What looks like complete openness may actually be carefully contained emotional release. The feelings are real, the connection is real, but it exists within boundaries that help the avoidant feel emotionally safe. Because those moments feel so convincing, the partner often treats them as proof of future consistency. They replay every memory, search for hidden meaning, and hope the intensity they experienced will eventually become everyday emotional closeness. When you truly understand this, your entire perspective on avoidant relationships begins to change. Real intimacy is not measured only by powerful emotional moments. It is revealed in the quiet spaces between them. It is the ability to stay emotionally connected without constantly creating distance or needing control to feel safe. The moment control becomes necessary to preserve closeness, the relationship slowly shifts away from shared vulnerability and into emotional self-protection. This is where many people become confused. The chemistry felt undeniable. The attraction was genuine. The emotional connection seemed too powerful to dismiss. Naturally, they begin believing those moments must point toward lasting love. After all, most people are taught that intense emotions mean deep commitment. In secure relationships, emotional and physical closeness usually grow together over time. With avoidant attachment, those two experiences are often separated. What appears to be complete openness may actually be carefully managed emotional release. The feelings are real, the connection is real, but it exists within limits that allow the avoidant to feel emotionally safe. Because those experiences feel so convincing, the partner starts treating them as proof of future consistency. They replay conversations, analyze every interaction, and search for reassurance that those powerful moments will eventually become everyday closeness. Then, consistency disappears and everything changes. Instead of questioning the pattern, they begin questioning themselves. Did I misunderstand the connection? Was I asking for too much? Was any of it genuine? That is where the emotional trap begins. Rather than recognizing inconsistency for what it is, they try to solve it, hoping temporary moments can somehow become permanent. From the avoidant side, the connection may still be completely genuine. They can sincerely experience love, affection, and vulnerability in certain moments while struggling to maintain that same openness afterward. As emotional closeness continues, their nervous system begins to feel overwhelmed. Their protective habits return. They regain control by creating distance. Now, two realities exist at once. One is the deep, unforgettable connection the partner experienced. The other is the silence, mixed signals, and emotional distance that follows. The mind desperately tries to make both realities fit together, but often they cannot. Intensity is not the same as consistency. A powerful experience is real, but it is never a guarantee of what comes next. Once you recognize that distinction, everything starts becoming clearer. You stop treating emotional highs as proof of the relationship's future. Instead, you understand they were meaningful moments without assuming they represented the entire emotional foundation. That does not make them false. It simply means they belonged to a specific emotional environment rather than a lasting pattern. Many people become exhausted trying to stretch temporary closeness into permanent security. Intensity can feel convincing while still lacking the stability required for a healthy relationship. Looking at the bigger picture reveals the real pattern: emotional suppression, carefully controlled vulnerability, repeated push and pull dynamics, and withdrawal driven by the need for internal regulation. Most relationships gradually become closer, steadier, and more secure. Avoidant relationships often move differently. They follow repeated cycles of connection and distance. That does not automatically mean the feelings are fake. More often, sustained vulnerability simply feels too overwhelming for the avoidant nervous system. Living inside that cycle eventually becomes emotionally draining. One partner begins overthinking every silence, searching for reassurance, or slowly disconnecting from themselves. Without realizing it, the relationship becomes less about genuine connection and more about surviving uncertainty. The real issue is not emotional intensity. It is the absence of continuity. Without consistency, even meaningful moments become confusing. This does not mean every avoidant relationship is hopeless. Awareness can absolutely change unhealthy patterns. But without self-awareness on both sides, imbalance continues growing until one person carries almost all of the emotional weight. The real question is not whether the connection was real. Often it was. The better question is whether you can remain emotionally grounded without turning temporary experiences into permanent expectations. What excites your emotions is not always what supports your heart over time. Many people mistake emotional highs for lasting compatibility, yet real security is built through reliability, trust, and emotional consistency, not occasional intensity. Healthy relationships are measured by how safe they feel on ordinary days, not only during unforgettable moments. Once you understand this, confusion begins to disappear. You stop personalizing inconsistency. You stop chasing certainty from patterns that never provide it. Most importantly, you stop sacrificing your own emotional well-being just to preserve moments that cannot sustain themselves. That is not emotional detachment. It is emotional maturity. The greatest lesson is not about deciding whether the relationship was real or imagined. It is about understanding the emotional structure you are living inside and whether it truly supports your long-term well-being. When that awareness settles in, your decisions become different. You stop confusing chemistry with commitment. You stop treating emotional peaks as promises. You stop abandoning your own needs simply because the connection feels powerful. Instead, you begin valuing what remains steady over what appears only occasionally. You realize that genuine love is not measured by how intensely someone can make you feel for a moment. It is measured by how consistently both people can create emotional safety over time. That is the deeper truth behind avoidant dynamics. Intensity can create unforgettable memories, but consistency is what builds lasting relationships. One gives you moments you'll always remember. The other gives you a relationship you can truly live in. Real love isn't measured by the intensity of a few unforgettable moments. It's measured by the consistency, safety, and emotional presence that remain long after those moments have passed. When you understand that difference, you stop chasing emotional highs and start choosing relationships that truly support your peace. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe to Raul Effect, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest insights on relationships, attachment styles, and emotional psychology. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today.